of the symbols of some national insignia or landscapes of Ukrainian fields or seas. Not at all. These are tattoos with fascist symbols, including a swastika and the emblem of the SS Panzer Division Totenkopf. And the photos in which the militant poses in front of a monument to Stepan Bandera. He also likes to accompany with quotes from Hitler's Field Marshal Erwin Rommel and collaborator Roman Shukhevich. We also found and displayed on his account desecrated Orthodox icons. All this is evidence of the true nature of the Kiev regime, as well as the leadership of those Western countries that sponsor it. I've also noted an interview that appeared on American video hostings recently about who has been recognized in our country as a foreign agent and the law enforcement agencies had other very justified reasons, but one of them when responding to a question how he feels about tattoos or symbols with direct use of Nazi symbols, swastika, SS emblems on their bodies, or if we don't speak about tattoos, drawings of the current Ukrainian armed forces militants. And he said that it could be seen, that is a direct quote, as mistakes of the youth. That is an interesting understanding. I haven't heard or seen anything like that during the Nuremberg trial. For some reason, all this was looked down upon from the international law because it was announced as illegal and was denounced. No one was talking about mistakes of the youth, of the representatives of the Third Reich. They were put on trial for those mistakes because those mistakes constituted a crime. So why are they trying to justify anything that has to do with symbols? And not just the underlying, but the true nature, Nazi nature of the Kiev regime. It's as if swastika is no longer swastika. And the SS symbols are trying to be justified. They're trying to call it the mistakes of the youth, because they no longer have it in them to hide those symbols. And now Kiev regime boasts for that. And they're now filled with these symbols. And you can even find it on official internet resources of those who hold state positions. It's difficult to call them state officials, but that's who they try to present themselves as.
And just look how skillfully the overwhelming majority of the global community and the minority who believes itself to be the civilized one, they somehow manage not to recognize this, to turn the blind eye to this. However, I think that they did not merely notice this, but they felt it through to the very bottom. The people, the population of the very Ukraine, against the backdrop of colossal losses in the front line. Those who are hiding in their offices and hiding behind their children, the representatives of Zelensky regime, are increasingly publicly lamenting the mass departure of young Ukrainians aged 18 to 22 abroad after the border was opened for them on August 28 of this year. The mayor of Ivano-Frankovsk, Ruslan Martinkiev, is openly complaining about the active shortage of personnel. On October 30 of this year, the ex-commander of the IDAR Punitive Battalion, Yevgen Dicky, included in the list of terrorist organizations banned in Russia, said in an interview with the national media that 10,000 young men who, he said, should have been left in the country and mobilized had left Ukraine in 2 months. Those young men understand quite well that they will be sought after to be brought to slaughter. They cannot turn their back to the neo-Nazi symbols which are hanging everywhere. These young men understand that neo-Nazi talks is not merely a sound and not a propaganda by Russia. This is their daily life and this is their reality. However, according to Western media, including those citing the Polish border service, the scale of the outflow of young Ukrainians is already about 150,000 people. Potential recruits understand that they have no prospects of remaining in the Ukrainian labor market, and the Kiev regime has prepared for them only the role of cannon fodder in the name of preserving its own dictatorship. Now, as observers note, the authorities are thinking about closing the border again in the near future, and those who have not had time to leave will most likely be mobilized and sent to the front one way, as you understand. And this is another confirmation of the scale of what is going on over there. The European allies of Zelensky are not very happy about the influx of young Ukrainians. Of course, they encourage Zelensky, but they encourage him to kill the citizens of Ukraine because they do not need them in their countries, they need them in graves. In Germany, the influx of male Ukrainian citizens aged 18 to 22 is growing exponentially. While in August the number was about 20 people per week, in September it exceeded 1,000 people, and in October it varied from 1.5 to 1.8,000. Under these conditions, Berlin has seriously considered adjusting the government's plans to limit payments of benefits to low-income Ukrainian citizens. And now I address the German authorities. Do not restrict yourself. Do not pose any limits. You are responsible for those you have tamed. And this is nothing but it. You have promised in Berlin bright future for citizens of Ukraine, and now you should pay them. I can cite one example. The recent similar decision taken in Poland served as an example. This is not surprising, since the number of Ukrainian refugees in Germany, according to official statistics, is about 1.26 million people. And do you know how much they were paid in 2024 alone? I do hope that citizens of Germany are aware about those numbers, because the German authorities are stealing this very money from their pockets. In 2024, in order to provide for the Ukrainian so-called refugees, German citizens paid 6.3 billion euros in social benefits. No, those are not salaries. Those are just digits in euros to provide for citizens, to provide for the refugees which are doing nothing for the people of Germany. Bavarian Interior Minister Mr. Herman advocated for depriving Ukrainian citizens liable for military service of the right to automatically receive asylum in European Union countries, as he noted the situation when they come to Germany and receive benefits while Kiev need recruits causes a lack of understanding among many Germans. No, it's not that thing. Say it openly. Germans do not understand, as many other citizens and residents of Western Germany who work a lot, why they are being stolen, why they are being looted in order to sponsor and to provide for the bloody Kiev regime. The citizens of many Western European states understand, and they see their economies collapsing and their lives collapsing. And usually those questions were retranslated and represented through mass media in democratic societies. Nowadays, in Western media, these questions are no longer asked. It is in Russia that our president speaks to the people on a regular basis and answers to the questions asked by the citizens of Russia, by the people of Russia. He speaks to them directly. He holds press conferences lasting many hours, answering to the questions of journalists who come from Russia and abroad, and we never refuse foreign journalists to ask a question to President Putin, even if they are provocative. It is in Russia that President Putin holds the direct line. Perhaps in some Western European states, sometimes just one time, ventures and holds the direct line with their own people and not the election, which are no longer democratic, but a direct line, the question and answer session with their own people. It is only then when they will understand what their own people think about the support of the Kiev regime paid by their own finance. And by the way, surveys of young Ukrainians who have entered the Federal Republic of Germany show that the majority of them immigrated to escape forced mobilization. Nowadays, the button which says human rights, emergency support is no longer active. It has been deactivated. Now they are not in the habit of dealing with human rights on a daily basis. Similar discussions have intensified in other European Union countries that have felt the burden of supporting Ukrainians, for example, in Poland, the Czech Republic, and Ireland. The situation illustrates the so-called limits of the solidarity of Western countries with their Kiev protégés, who are supposed to continue to mobilize their population in order to fight Russia for the sake of Western interests. While the European military-industrial complex musters hundreds of millions of euros in budget and loan funds, those are the people of Ukraine who must continue to die. And to elaborate on this subject, I would like to speak on desertion in Ukraine. The anxieties of the Zelensky regime, which is concerned about its self-preservation, are understandable. The average number of those who have left the ranks of the Ukrainian armed forces and the battlefield, according to the official data of the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine alone, remains stable at the level of 15,000 to 18,000 people per month, with a so-called monthly mobilization. Now, in this case, tens of thousands are appropriate, and those numbers are not appropriate when they speak about abducted children. These are numbers of those who left the battlefield, not the children who were kidnapped. The so-called monthly mobilization potential is 30,000 recruits. Since February 2022, more than 230,000 criminal cases have been opened for unauthorized abandonment of a military unit and 53,000 for desertion. Just imagine. 230,000 criminal cases were opened, which have evidence and all profiles and documents which showcase and confirm that this criminal act was committed. In reality, the total figure, according to experts, can reach 500,000 people, as observers note. After the change in the rules for registering deserters on June the 1st, 2025, many commanders, in order to temporarily preserve payments for escaped soldiers, are in no hurry to report such cases. This is the kind of mathematics they are carrying out, and the authorities, the government, I mean the Kiev regime, of course, they do not provide the full scale of those digits because they want to diminish those numbers. And the picture becomes even more terrifying for the Kiev regime if we add to the mentioned figures the 1.7 million irretrievable losses of the Ukrainian military based on the data of the Ukrainian Armed Forces General Staff, and this is not the definitive figure. These are only fragments, some fragments of the picture of the desertion in the Ukrainian armed forces. The true picture of how the Ukrainian soldiers live in the battlefield is even more terrifying, even more horrific. But I would like to reiterate once again that journalists and bloggers, of course, they track all those figures and those developments. However, this does not stop Bankova. For the sake of preserving their power, their dictatorship, and of course for the enrichment, they are ready to continue hostilities until the last Ukrainian is left standing and to exterminate their own population. Now, speaking about the military needs of the Kiev regime, we noticed the analysis of Ukraine's budget and expenditures for the needs of the front and current needs published on October 30 in the British journal The Economist. According to the publication's calculation, to continue the conflict against Russia in 2026-2029, Kiev will need $389 billion in financial resources and weapons. Once again, $389 billion. This, as noted, is almost twice the amount of support from Europe since February 2022. Let me remind you, about $206 billion what was spent. It is noteworthy that according to the analysts, and there is one clarification, those were funds provided by prosperous economies, and they were continuing to develop on energy resources they were receiving from Russia. Given that for themselves, at the instruction of Brussels, the Western Europeans are banning themselves to use the stable and guaranteed energy resources at a reasonable price they used to buy from Russia on a regular basis, given the evident trends of economy stagnation, their own economies, I mean, and any attempts to revive their economy by militarization of industries alone. You can imagine that the doubled burden of expenditure on the Kiev regime will kill the Western European countries. It is noteworthy that, according to analysts, the financing of Ukraine will have to continue even in the event of an end to hostilities due to the need to maintain the army and contain Russia. The Economist clarifies that if the cost of helping Kiev fell entirely on Europe, it would have to fork out $328 billion and the rest would be paid by Britain. The publication also states that the sources of financing for Ukraine's military expenditures are gradually drying up, and in February 2026 there will be no money for these purposes. According to journalists, about $110 billion has been allocated for the supply of the Ukrainian armed forces this year. In total, Kiev military spending by the end of 2025 will amount to $360 billion. And how could these funds be used? They could have been spent for social purposes. They could have been spent to assist the needy in South Africa and in Asian countries, and many people could have been provided with shelter. Many infrastructure facilities could have been built, restored on the territories of such states as France, Italy, and some others. Many tragedies could have been prevented, many diseases could have been cured, and many children could have been spent. But there is an impression that those forces who are behind fomenting the conflict in Ukraine do not need this at all. And of course, with aggression, with exacerbated aggression and hatred, the Kiev regime is fighting against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and I would like to reiterate that they are trying to exterminate not the form, but the content. They are trying to exterminate the Orthodox faith in general. The Kiev regime is not abandoning its plan to liquidate the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church and seize its property in favor of schismatic so-called Orthodox Church of Ukraine. On October the 29th of this year, the Supreme Court of Ukraine rejected the appeal of the Kiev metropolis, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, with a demand to restore its rights and guarantee a fair judicial process within the framework of the lawsuit filed by the State Service of Ukraine. This is an attempt by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to temporarily prohibit this department from taking actions against church structures associated with the Kiev metropolis, while the main lawsuit on its ban is being considered. The church asked to the court to apply protective measures, fearing that without this, the State Service for Ethnopolitics and Freedom of Conscience of Ukraine would be able to send orders on the elimination of violations to 154 religious organizations that are part of the metropolis. According to representatives of the Kiev metropolis, this could provoke numerous lawsuits to ban them. On October 30 of this year, the first session of the 6th Administrative Court of Appeal of Kiev was held on the aforementioned lawsuit of the State Service for Ethnopolitics and Freedom of Conscience of Ukraine. However, the regime failed to immediately achieve the desired decision. According to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the court refused to satisfy the request of the said service to prohibit the metropolis from disposing of the real estate belonging to it by right of ownership, as well as to conduct expenditure operations on its accounts. It is also known that the court received about 1,300 applications from believers from the congregation to involve them in the case as third parties, which will require time for the familiarization by the parties. A new hearing is scheduled for December 11. One more thing. The fighting against memorials. The Bandera soldiers are fighting against memorials of the Soviet Union. Of the Soviet memorials which were erected to commemorate the true heroes who fought fascists and Nazis. In Trostenets, Sumy region, neo-Nazis dismantled a monument to the tank crews who liberated the city from the Nazis. In the city of Vishnov, Kiev region, they demolished a monument in honor of the soldier liberators, and in the city of Polony, Khmelnytsky region, a bas-relief of the Order of the Patriotic War was removed from a monument erected at the mass grave of Soviet soldiers who fell in battles with the fascists.
All this is nothing but a confirmation of the relevance, of the correctness, and of the forcefulness of the special military operation. All the tasks and goals that we have set in front of ourselves, they will all be definitely achieved, as the Russian leadership has stated repeatedly. But this war against humanity, against human nature, and I mean the war on historic memory, rages on, and it's not just continuing in Ukraine, but in the Baltic states as well. This is where the true fight against consciousness is taking place. And nothing but scandalous could be heard about the act of vandalism in the Estonia reports of yet another state vandalism. This refers to the exhumation using an excavator of the remains of sailors and other Russian soldiers who died in battles. In 1941-1945, the Estonian authorities were not satisfied with the demolition in 2022 of the monument with the Red Star that stood there. They've decided to completely clean up this place, which is sacred to our compatriot. And this is rampant inhumanity. And these egregious actions are contrary to Tallinn's obligations under Article 34 of Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions of August 12, 1949, relating to the protection of victims of international armed conflicts. Russia strongly condemns the immoral and criminal campaign being carried out in Estonia to desecrate the remains of those who died fighting fascism. We reiterate that a criminal code of the Russian Federation provides for criminal liability for the destruction, damage, or desecration of military graves, including those located abroad. I would like to recall the words of one of the figures of show business who said while living abroad in the Baltic states that they're a sovereign state and they're free to do whatever they want with it. Is that what you're supporting? Are you supporting the so-called exhumation by excavators when in fact it's a new term? Excavator, exhumation of bodies of heroes who fought against Nazism. Then feel free to say it up front. That you're not just advocating for aesthetics, but you're supporting neo-Nazism. But Estonia is not just known for that. You have to understand neo-Nazism is not just about the past. First and foremost, it's about the present. Because the fight continues not just with a historic memory, but against their own citizens. While utility fees continue to rise in the Baltic states, they have some of the highest inflation and unemployment rates in the European Union. And against this backdrop, Estonia plans to introduce in January 2026 an additional surcharge on electricity payments, which will be levied on both consumers and producers. And these actions that are useless, the Estonians are trying to cover up with ostentatious arguments that this measure, do you know what's their excuse? Is a price to pay for energy independence from Russia. I believe that's perfect explanation, perfectly reasonable explanation. I don't know. Perhaps this line should be continued. Anorexia is a price to pay for not consuming food. It's the same line of logic. It's true insanity what they're trying to claim. The ruling Baltic regimes, as a result of their anti-popular policies, have already caused a catastrophic mass exodus of citizens from their countries. About half of the remaining working-age population is also considering moving to economically developed countries. The birth rate is declining and life expectancy remains one of the lowest in Europe. I would just like to recall that it's not under the oppression or occupation of any kind that you're witnessing these figures in the Baltic states. This is their supposed flourishment and the independent sovereignty that is leading to these results. So this is what true independence looks like in the Baltic states. We have carefully studied the advisory opinion issued by the International Court of Justice on October 22nd this year on Israel's obligations as an occupying power and a member state of the UN with regards to the activities of the UN and other international organizations and the presence of third countries in the occupied Palestinian territory. And we will comment on this after the expert. That this is the court's third advisory opinion on the consequences of the Israeli occupation, including the second since the beginning of the current crisis in the Arab-Israeli conflict zone. We've drawn attention to the legal assessments of Israel's legislation and specific actions in relation to the territories it occupies, the court found a violation of the requirements of the Fourth Geneva Convention 1941 on the supply of food and sanitary materials to the population. In this regard, Israel's obligation as the occupying power to ensure operations to provide assistance to the population of the occupied Palestinian territory and to facilitate the implementation of these measures by all available means was confirmed. The Russian side took the same position during the oral hearings on this case. In addition, the chief judicial body of the World Organization emphasized the need to respect the mandate and status of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA. It was noted that Israel's actions with regard to UNRWA must be brought into line with its international obligations, including those under the 1946 Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations, as well as international humanitarian law. On November 6th, the UNESCO General Conference, taking place in Samarkand, has elected a new Director General of the organization, renowned Egyptologist and former Minister of Tourism and Antiquities of Egypt, Khalid Al-Nani, for the period from 2025 to 2029. He will take office on November 14th. We welcome this decision. We're impressed by the business-like and constructive attitude of the new head of the organizations, which can be summarized as follows. We need a strong UNESCO, completely depoliticized, focused on consensus and harmony, including with the use of technology that is intolerant to discord. We need a UNESCO for the people. Khalid Al-Anani is taking out this post at a turbulent, difficult time. He inherits a heavy legacy from France's Audrey Azoulay. Against the backdrop of budgetary turmoil, the organization has been hit by damaging politicization, and it has been undermined by it, with the resources and attention of member states often diverted to initiatives that are not in line with UNESCO's goals and objectives. Khalid Al-Anani faces difficult tasks, implementing long overdue reforms, strengthening the Secretariat's interaction with and accountability to member states, and improving the effectiveness of program implementation. We support the new head of UNESCO in his plans and assure him of our readiness to cooperate. We welcome the signing of Cambodia and Thailand at the ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur on October 26 this year of a joint declaration aimed at resolving the border conflict. We are confident that the agreements reached with the assistance of the Malaysian chairmanship of ASEAN will contribute to the peaceful resolution of existing differences, the establishment of close bilateral dialogue, and the long-term and sustainable normalization of this situation. We believe that many territorial disputes in the world are a legacy of Western colonial policy. We believe that given the deterioration of the overall situation in the Asia-Pacific region, it is important to act in the spirit of unity and solidarity that is characteristic of ASEAN. On November 5th, 6th, the first meeting of sports ministers of the Dialogue on Cooperation in Asia was held in Samara. Member states have agreed to organize the event in October last year. At the third summit of the association in Qatar, the Russian side proposed to host the ministerial meeting. The declaration adopted at the end of the meeting sets out the objectives of developing both traditional and digital sports activities, as well as increasing the involvement of young people and other categories, including volunteers. Participants exchanged national experiences and practices in promoting sport, called for the prevention of discrimination against athletes, including in terms of their admission to international competitions. The conference demonstrated that there is a steadily growing demand for positive practical cooperation in Asia. Sports is one of the promising areas with good potential for cooperation, as long as it's not inverted in any way. We're continuing our efforts to build constructive, pragmatic cooperation in multilateral regional forums, working on a non-politicized agenda for joint development. And we view the Asia Cooperation Dialogue as an important element of a unified system of intergovernmental cooperation across the vast expanse of Eurasia. Another announcement. On November 12th to 15th, one of Russia's flagship IT events, Digital Solutions Forum, will take the large presentation of the export potential of St. Petersburg will take place for the first time at the leading international food and beverage exhibition in Shanghai. They will include, of course, ice cream so beloved by our Chinese friends within the framework of the exhibition. a business session, export potential of St. Petersburg, a masterclass for producers and exporters on the specifics of doing business with Chinese partners, as well as meetings with leading importers of the PRC are planned. All the events with the participation of Russian entrepreneurs will be held with the support of the Consulate General of Russia in Shanghai, and of course the Russian Trade Representative Office in China. So we invite everyone to visit the Russia stand on this event, and of course to take note of the Russian cuisine. On November 12th to 15th, the Russian National Center in Moscow will host one of Russia's flagship IT events, the Digital Solutions Forum. The conference is an important expert platform for dialogue between government and business representatives. Participants will discuss the results of digital transformation in our country over the past year, focusing on the impact of information technology on the economy, the digitization of government and regions, and IT solutions for improving the quality of life of Russian citizens. The forum will be attended by the Chairman of the Government of the Russian Federation, Mikhail Mishustin, the Deputy Chairman of the Government of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Grigorenko. The event program includes an exhibition of technological projects where domestic IT companies will demonstrate their digital solutions and developments implemented in the economy, public administration, and everyday life, as well as an award ceremony for the winners of the Digital Solutions Award. We're confident that the forum will become a new point of attraction for representatives of the IT community and a place for strategic decision-making. And of course, we wish the participants productive work, ambitious projects, and new heights. And of course, we invite all journalists, especially foreign correspondents. We have invited our Russian journalists a long time ago to participate, and especially those who are credited in Russia and those who want to visit to participate in covering this event. And the relevant link will be available in the text version of today's briefing. And the third Astrakhan International Forum, North-South International Transport Corridor, New Opportunities and Horizons, will be held on November 26-28th. This event has been held since 2023 and is an authoritative discussion platform that brings together representatives of government, business, and the expert community. Russia, being the largest Eurasian power, makes a significant contribution to maintaining peace and stability on our shared continent that is home to several distinctive civilizations. President Vladimir Putin's initiative to form a greater Eurasian partnership is aimed at achieving this goal. It envisages the establishment of broad cooperation between Eurasian states and multilateral associations. In this context, our unconditional priority is to further unlock the potential of the North-South International Transport Corridor. And the goal, obviously, is to connect Northern Eurasia, the Caspian region, Central, South, and Southeast Asia, Eastern Africa, by developing freight routes through major logistics hubs on the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean coasts. The North-South International Transport Corridor continues to demonstrate stable growth. Cargo traffic through the Russian segment increased by 37% at the end of 2024, opening up new horizons for Russian and international businesses interested in entering the promising markets of Iran, India, Asia, and Africa, with a combined population of 3.5 billion people. We're confident that the upcoming forum will contribute to the expansion of broad international cooperation in the interests of developing the North-South Transport Corridor as a key Eurasian transport artery and will facilitate the establishment of promising trade and investment ties. And of course, the link to this event will be available in the text version of today's briefing. And we received a lot of questions for the next topic. On December 3rd and 4th, Moscow will host, under the auspices of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, will host the BRICS Plus 2025 Counterterrorism Conference, National and Regional Counterterrorism Strategies in the context of emerging challenges and security threats. The conference will bring together representatives of relevant authorities, civil society, and academic circles from BRICS Plus countries engaged in comprehensive research on counterterrorism and anti-extremism, experts from the UN, CIS, SCO, and CST will also join the discussions. Participants will discuss issues related to countering the financing of terrorism and the use of modern information and communication technologies for illegal purposes, combating extremism, and attempts to radicalize the population. Delegates will focus separately on various theoretical and methodological aspects of eradicating terrorism, exchange assessments of security threats at the national, regional, and global levels in the context of current geopolitical realities, share experiences and effective practices in the field of counterterrorism. The conference is aimed at complementing the comprehensive efforts of the member states undertaken within the framework of the BRICS Working Group on Counterterrorism, as well as further strengthening cooperation in this area on the solid foundation of the BRICS counterterrorism strategy from 2020, the action plan for its implementation of 2021, and the position paper of the BRICS counterterrorism working group from 2024. We invite representatives of mass media to cover this event, and of course, the link for context will be available in the text version of today's briefing. And I'm ready to pass to our questions. Is the International Life magazine with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have 2 questions. First of all, how could you comment the reports of the American mass media that the U.S. administration has at least 3 plans to conduct a force operation against Venezuela in order to overthrow the power in this country? First of all, this should be commented on by the official representatives of American authorities. I saw that there were comments disproving that, but I believe we should operate based on their official position. And second, our approach to the situation in the region, we have given our assessments repeatedly, and we're ready to present them once again. Any escalation will only lead to more problems. There are different tactics, different means of conducting affairs, but obviously what a number of American observers and experts are talking about in different structures of authorities, all this appears in mass media. This open aggression will once again lead to nothing but the aggravation of the situation, instead of resolving the substantive issues that could easily be resolved through legal, diplomatic channels within the international law. I would like to recall such stories as for how the U.S. used force and how they were on the brink of resolving a conflict or fighting another emergence of universal evil. These cases have been numerous. They had a lot of pretexts, used a lot of arguments, but just look at real examples. The situation in Iraq, the situation in Afghanistan. Different situations, different means of U.S. presence, and the Afghanistan even had the UN Security Council mandate, but they still didn't follow it. So this situation could be used here as well. Just the situation in the Middle East, the north of Africa, they're proving that this approach, based on the force without the international law, without any mandate or any clearance, only leads to the aggravation of problems, both already present in the issue and in the U.S. themselves.
Thank you very much for your answer. My second question, according to reports from the Bloomberg News Agency, the United Kingdom authorities have sent a new batch of Storm Shadow cruise missiles to the Kyiv regime. The article indicates that this decision was made against the backdrop of Trump's refusal to send Tomahawks to Ukraine. How would you comment on this? Well, you know, long ago, not 1 year ago, not 2, not 3, or not 5 years ago, I did question the materials spread by this news agency that you mentioned, and long ago I have been saying that it is no longer mass media when it comes to the genre, when it comes to transparency of its actions. It's nothing but the place where the data is no longer verified. That is why, to comment on the information that they published, I am not going to do this. Many times we disproved the misinformation they have published about Russia, but I would like to say about a different thing. No doubt, our Ministry of Defense tracks deliveries to the Kiev regime by different Western coalitions, and we comment on this based on the data we receive from the Ministry of Defense. But another thing is of interest in this case. I believe that the key point is that the Great Britain, from point one, was interested not in diplomatic and political settlement of this question, but in fomenting and triggering this conflict. This was long before 2022. Just remember how the British ship forced its way through close to the Russian border in 2022. Just recall the destructive behavior of British representatives when there was an opportunity to hold negotiations with the representatives of the Kiev regime at their request in 2022. That is why Britain was in favor of escalation in Ukraine from the very beginning, and it was doing everything possible in order to prevent by all means the diplomatic settlement of this crisis with the political tools in order to find a solution to this crisis. That is why the position of Great Britain and the official authorities in London have not changed at all. We understand quite well what they are being engaged in. They are engaged in the escalation of the conflict. This is the only thing they need in this regard. Thank you very much. Xinhua, are you with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I'm from Xinhua. PRC President Xi Jinping recently held a meeting with Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, who was on a visit to China. What does Russia think of the outcomes of this visit, and what do you think of further development and an interaction in line with the strategy of socioeconomic development and China's 15th five-year plan? I believe that this visit was well covered by mass media of Russia, China, and global media. Let me remind you that from November 3rd to November 4th, Mikhail Mishustin paid an official visit to China in order to hold the anniversary meeting of the heads of governments of our two states. He was received by the head of the People's Republic of China. The parties discussed the strategic partnership and the other relevant points with a focus on promoting development, trade, and economy. They also exchanged their views on projects in the humanitarian investment spheres. They also exchanged their opinions on the international regional agenda. The visit was held in a friendly atmosphere, which is a key feature of Russian-Chinese relations. Also, the key great number of agreements was signed, including in agriculture. The cooperation between our two states plays a key role in global development, and the two sides agreed to boost cooperation in key spheres. Thank you very much. RIA News, are you with us? Good afternoon. We have two questions today. My first question. The Moldovan government approved the denunciation of the agreement with Russia on the creation and function of cultural centers in order to close the Russian Center for Culture and Science. I would like to learn your opinion in this regard. Well, to understand or to build a logic chain of events, of consequences, why Chisinau carried out these steps. Let me remind you, on November the 5th, the government of Untiano, absolutely in a groundless and counterproductive manner, took the decision to denounce the 1998 Russian-Moldovan Intergovernmental Agreement on the creation and functioning of cultural centers. On the basis of this agreement, the Russian Center for Science and Culture operated in Chisinau. We also paid attention to the words of the head of the Republic's Ministry of Culture that the Russian House allegedly became an instrument for spreading harmful narratives and a threat to national security. And perhaps they misunderstood something. We do not spread any narratives. We spread ideas, and the narratives are in the heads of some other people. And allegedly this all is being done under the cover, quote, some actions aimed at undermining the country's sovereignty, unquote. And a question comes up to my head. When they close the center, will they stop talking about any threats to their sovereignty, or will they continue this rhetoric? We'll have to track this. Of course, no facts, no evidence have been provided. Nothing that could be used to prove this. Why I say that no logical, no consequential chain can be formed in this way. When you accuse something, you have to provide some evidence, some symbolic evidence or some practical evidence. You have to cite some examples of any destructive activities. No examples have ever been cited. Why so? Because the Russian Center, in reality, is engaged in preserving the centuries-old Russian cultural heritage in Moldovan territory and is a place of unity for a huge number of Moldovan residents, helps Moldovan applicants to enter state-funded places in the best universities in Russia. There is nothing about its activities that could even remotely resemble an attack on the sovereignty, as they said, independence, and even more so, a subversion of Moldova's national security. Well, it depends on what they mean by saying this. If they mean that the high educational level of their own citizens, of Moldovan citizens, is an obstacle to them and to their sovereignty, then perhaps, in essence, the continuation of education of their own citizens is considered as something that they do not need. Such anti-Russian initiatives testify to the continuation by the Moldovan authorities of the course of breaking away from traditional ties with our country and some horrific myths. The integration into the Russophobic camp. In Moldova itself, the step has already been called a blow not to Russia but to the Republic itself, and, quote, an attempt to divert citizens' attention from real problems, unquote. And this all has been demonstrated on several other examples. And the situation in socioeconomic sphere is degrading. I would like to cite the examples in contrast to Moldovan authorities. Since the beginning of this year, the country's external debt has grown to $11.4 billion. In January, August, the export of goods decreased by 2.5% and the imports increased by 18.3% compared to the same period in 2024. The new government of Moldova decided to start its work not by introducing solutions that could have alleviated the condition of economy of Moldova and the quality of life of their own people, but by closing the Center of Culture and Science. The decision also caused regret among ordinary Moldovans. but no one is going to listen to them in Moldova. Thank you very much for your question. And you have already answered to my second question. That is why I'm not going to ask it. Thank you very much. RT, are you with us? Good afternoon. We have 3 questions today, if I may. My first question. In his interview, Alexander Vučić, the president of Serbia, suggested that the whole amount of munitions and weapons should be sold to the European Union. When answering to the question whether they can be sold to Ukraine, he answered that they can be sent to any means and to any objectives. You know, when I read all those interviews given by Alexander Vučić, a question occurs to me whether there is only one president, because I have an impression that those are interviews given by different people. We hear one statement when he is in Moscow. We hear completely different statements when he gives some interviews in some other points of the world, and I now mention only the public sphere. Perhaps mass media distorted some facts. Then the press service of Alexander Vučić should have done some comments and clarifications whether everything has been quoted in a correct and appropriate manner. Honestly, on a repeated basis, including at the top level, we received reassurances that the export of Serbian munitions is under strict control, that these products are not going to be sent to Ukraine, so that Kiev cannot use it against our military. Let me just remind you what kind of military men those are. They are the members of the armed forces that have repeatedly come to rescue, historically and in modern times, to the friendly Serbian people. I refuse even to discuss not only the possibility, but the whole subject that Russian soldiers, that Russian military, who historically gave their soul, their heart, in every meaning of this word, sacrificing their lives or pledging love and loyalty to the Serbian brothers, would ever be killed by Serbian munitions or by Serbian weapons, and that this could ever happen by accident. But deliberately. I refuse even to think about this. I'm convinced that this should never happen. We proceed from the assumption that Belgrade will strictly adhere to the promises it made. There is a wording, I do not know how you will translate it into Serbian, the promises they gave us. I am not going to use this this word us. These promises were not given to concrete people, to concrete state. These promises were given by a sovereign state elected by people. They were not addressed to someone individually. It was not targeted. It was declared as a position of a legitimately elected president who expresses the will of his people. Thank you very much. My second question. The new government of Japan is toughening its rhetoric against Russia and the DPRK while forgetting its own crimes during the Second World War, in particular the massacre of Korean residents of the village of Mizuha on Sakhalin by Japanese militarists in August 1945. What do you think about this? I'm shocked every time, at every occasion, that Russian-Japanese relations, which we used to say, the problems, the agenda, I would say, emerging between Russia and Japan is asked to be commented on not by Japanese media but by some other media, and there are dozens of them with accreditation in Moscow. I have only one question: what are they doing on the territory of Russia? If Russian and Japanese relations are the matter of interest by Russian journalists or by some journalists who are connected with the Balkan affairs, American journalists, no matter who, but not Japanese journalists. We have repeatedly called on official Tokyo to abandon attempts to silence the inhuman pages of its own history and to recognize the results of the Second World War in full. We regularly emphasize that Japan's revanchist policy hurts the feelings of the peoples of neighboring countries who suffered from its barbaric expansionist campaign in the first half of the 20th century. Against this backdrop, the constant speculation of the Japanese side about some atrocities of the Red Army during the landing operations on Sakhalin and the southern Kurils, as well as accusations of cruelty in the actions of the Soviet government against Japanese citizens living there, are surprising. Tokyo, even after its surrender, did not stop committing crimes that have no statute of limitations. In this regard, we intend to continue our efforts to identify the historical truth on this topic. Since 2021, the Russian side has been systematically working to classified documents containing information about the bloody massacre by the Japanese of the Korean residents of the village of Mizuha on Sakhalin, now the village of Pozharskaya. Although discrimination and violence against ethnic Koreans in the territory of what was then part of the Japanese Empire, the southern part of Sakhalin Island, were regularly recorded. The massacre, this is the word for it, in August 1945 was the apogee. Even then, during the atrocities committed, including by former servicemen of the Imperial Army of Japan, 27 Korean residents were brutally murdered under the pretext that they sympathized with the Red Army. Among the dead were 6 children, including a 6-month-old infant. In August 2025, on the eve of the 80th anniversary of the tragic events, a memorial ceremony was held there. A number of previously secret documents were also made public, including an act from July 19, 1946 on the exhumed bodies and protocol of the inspection of the scene of the incident from July 21, 1946. The materials contain information about horrifying scenes of murders, striking in their senseless cruelty. We will add the text of the briefing with the references to corresponding sections. These declassified testimonies are kept in the Pabada Museum and Memorial Complex and the Scientific Archive of the Sakhalin Regional Museum of Local Lore. In addition, you can get acquainted with the details of the reports on the resources of the Sakhalin media. We will make this section as complete with references and links as possible. The work to uncover and publicize the crimes of militaristic Japan will be continued, and you will agree it is impossible not to draw a parallel between the official Tokyo's hushing up of these barbaric actions of the Japanese military and its archive support for the Nazi regime in Ukraine, which used barbaric, brutal methods against the civilian population of Russia.
And the last question, on the October the 30th, they've decided the new leadership for the Moldovan parliament, and on October 31st, they've even informed the government of the republic what are the expectations of the Russian side towards the new legal and acting power of Moldova. Of course, we have closely followed the forming of parliament and the government of Moldova. They have not just made statements, but also taken steps towards our country, and the steps of official Moldovan authorities can only be deemed as anti-Russian. It's difficult to say that the formations are new, because unfortunately at the helm are still representatives of pro-Western powers. As Moldovan politologists have pointed out, the changes were more of cosmetic nature. In the new parliament, just as after the last parliamentary elections in 2021, the deputy officials of the ruling party have gained the majority, have gained the positions of the president and one of the vice president. And the same situation is with the government, where more than half of ministers have come back from the former formation of the cabinet. And you can see how we shouldn't expect any major changes after the program of the work of the government was proposed on 31st of October, titled the EU Peace and Development. I don't know, perhaps they turned off their TVs, have closed off their windows. Perhaps they're no longer aware of what the peace looks like in the Europe, because their program or economy are military oriented. Among the priorities of them are the conclusion of the negotiations by 2028 on joining the European Union, integration in the architecture of European security, as well as the modernization of legal and institutional base according to the EU standards. As for the restoration of dialogue with Russia, there is no mention of that whatsoever. On the contrary, they are aimed at continuing to denounce the agreements within the Commonwealth that are not in line with the interests of the Republic. We've also taken a look at the expert opinions, and the Western sponsors of Chisinau will continue to do everything under the guise of European integration, try to make of Moldova anti-Russia, another anti-Russia, following Ukrainian and Baltic example. So far, they're failing. Moldovan residents are advocating against being forced to do it. They remember and appreciate the contribution of Russia into the preservation and development of Moldovan statehood and national identity. And I'm convinced that looking what is being done to them, the citizens will not abandon their plans. We once again confirm our openness to restoration and development of constructive bilateral cooperation in the interests of people of Russia and Moldova. And of course, we will protect anything that has to do with real, true spirit of cooperation, friendship, in the name of our two peoples. Thank you so much, and I wish you a good day. Thank you so much. Is Reuters with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. We're here, and we have a question about the recent Financial Times publications that reported that the U.S. were supposedly amazed by the intransigence of Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov during a meeting with Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the sidelines in September. And according to the sources, Lavrov's uncompromising stance regarding the conflict in Ukraine led to doubts on the American side about the negotiations of Moscow and Ukraine on the settlement. How could you comment on this report? It's like you knew what to ask. This is an incredible story, and I believe, and it's worthy of Agatha Christie works. If this article appeared back in the days of Agatha Christie, I believe it could be a pretext for another detective story titled A True American Article. Now let's take a look. Financial Times is a British source. Of course, there's an international component and a wide network of special correspondents, and there's different financing, but the main headquarters, and how to put it best, I don't want to say the main roots, but the main intellectual power is London. So an article comes out dedicated to the US-Russia negotiations. The article makes references, this British news article makes references to the supposed sources aware of the state of negotiations between Russia and the US. So who could truly be aware, first and foremost, with the state of negotiations? Either representatives of the Russian Federation, but the article is clearly anti-Russian, or the representatives of the United States. Could the sources of the current American elite have anti-Russian nature? Of course, they have different sources. Could those be sources truly aware of the situation? Sure. But there is a certain point that does not make sense. Either those American sources truly aware of the situation around the negotiations would not leak this into a British source. They would give it to their own journalists. Secondly, why would a British newspaper publish material that not just takes pleasure in the theme of Russia-US issues, as they've put it nicely, but they make an announcement out of it without mentioning any names. Perhaps we weren't expecting names, but not even their position or the area where the source is coming from. Why such article came out? That's because it's the UK, and I don't mean the British people, but the conglomerate of political elites, of special services. It's them who are the main basing point of escalating the situation around Ukraine. There's a lot of proof of that. First and foremost, I've already pointed it out. This destructive, provocational action implemented by the UK way before 2022 around the situation in Ukraine, around Ukraine, and of course against the European Union, that was aimed at weakening the European Union. But we also recall 2022, who was behind the undermining of the negotiation process that began back then. Of course it was the UK. And it wasn't just one newspaper or a couple sources, but directly Boris Johnson, if I'm not mistaken, who was the Prime Minister back in the day. Was he the Prime Minister? Who personally came to Ukraine and dissuaded the Kiev regime from continuing negotiations with Russia. Why? because the negotiations and diplomatic settlement and any kind of peace in Ukraine were not needed. They were not convenient for the UK, and it was the same nature and the same spirit that were present when publishing this article. And of course it wasn't just published in order to gain likes or gain views on the website of Financial Times, but it was also necessary in order to, after that, stir up the situation for it to be a source. Because you see, Financial Times is supposedly a respectable source with their history, with their investigations and so on, so that there was something to reference. You know, reporting some sources, the information would never stay afloat, but when they're legalized, but when they've passed through a publication like that, and just take a look at how it's sing-sung right now. So we shouldn't comment on what is written in the article, but we should comment on the fact that it's yet another element of information war that is part of a hybrid war waged by the collective West and its Anglo-Saxon bloc, where Ukraine used as an instrument and peace, stability, and security on the European continent are the anti-goal for them. Thank you so much, Madam Zakharova. You're welcome. You've brought me immense pleasure, truly. Thank you so much. Is Vestia with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions. American mass media report on the U.S. tests of the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile. How does Russia assess these actions? And does Moscow view this as a threat to strategic stability and reason to adjust its own position on arms control? Russian relevant agencies, of course, monitor the actions of the United States and other states in the nuclear sphere with all the necessary thoroughness in such matters. This also applies to the testing of strategic offensive arms in the American arsenal, including the aging Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile. I will verify the correct pronunciation. And I'd like to take a look at the etymology of the name. Didn't really think much of it before, but the very same missile that was mentioned, as far as we can judge right now, based on the reports that have been made public. In this case, we're talking about relatively routine actions. But I would like to reiterate that this is just a preemptive analysis. The experts will speak on it as well. But attention is also drawn to the fact that the event followed the ambiguous statements by U.S. President about his intention to intensify testing activities related to nuclear weapons, allegedly in response to some supposed equivalent steps by Russia and China. At the same time, we still have the natural question that has arisen for many, including in the U.S., is the intention to intensify the testing of nuclear weapon delivery vehicles. Was that what Washington meant? Or did Washington indeed contemplate the direct resumption under far-fetched pretexts of explosive tests of nuclear warhead elements, in defiance of the provisions of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and the content of the relevant national moratoria, which once again were initiated several decades ago for the period until this agreement enters into force for all countries of the nuclear five, of course including the US. I believe the US representatives should answer these questions. If it's the latter, that this will undoubtedly create an extremely negative dynamic and trigger responsive steps from other states, including Russia. This is what recently, just the other day, was mentioned by the President of the Russian Federation when commenting on the subject. For now, we know that the signals coming from Washington cause justified concern in all corners of the world. They continue to be contradictory, and their underlying reason should be clarified. The European Commission expects the negotiations on Ukraine's membership in the EU will essentially begin by the end of the year, according to statements from the European Commission. In your opinion, are the European Union countries really ready to begin the process of Ukraine's accession to the bloc, or they're just giving empty promises to Kyiv? I believe that all of us, the international community, are witnessing. Some are contributing, some are just witnesses to a real spectacle that is being played out by Brussels and the individual member states and the Kyiv regime in the context of Ukraine's Euro integration aspirations. And it would be hilarious if it wasn't so tragic. The actors of this play, with enviable regularity, declare the readiness of the country to join the EU. They just report on allegedly achieved progress in the course of pre-accession negotiations and the successful implementation of internal reforms. But I believe everyone understands perfectly, and here there is clear consensus that in practice Ukraine is hopelessly far from fulfilling the standard EU requirements for candidate countries and is unlikely to be really ready to join the Union in the foreseeable future. No matter how much Brussels tries to credit Ukraine with successes on its path to the membership, it's not plausible, because there are real figures, real results. And despite Zelensky destroying television in Ukraine and news reporting as a whole only maintaining one signal, you can't hide an all in a bag. And real figures, real facts speak for themselves, and they reveal the true nature of Ukraine. The annual report on EU enlargement policy of November 4th this year, the European Commission was forced to state many shortcomings in the implementation of the recommendations previously put forward to Ukraine, including on the reform of the judicial system, improving the economic situation in the country, and combating corruption. However, despite the lack of visible success, and actually a rollback in some areas, Brussels continues the financial pumping of the Kyiv regime. I'd like to remind you that on November 4th this year, the EU Council approved the fifth tranche under the Fund for Ukraine in the amount of nearly 2 billion euros, 1.8 billion euros. What kind of approach is this when they have no touch with reality whatsoever? They're just pretending that everything is okay. It's nothing but another manifestation of hypocrisy and direct lies on the part of the EU. Brussels is ready to turn a blind eye to a lot in favor of its own political ambitions. But the decision to launch the negotiation process, should that ever see the light of day, will only be a symbolic step aimed at supporting the Kyiv regime which will need to visualize any kind of support other than arms and money, and the launch of negotiations and European integration in this case are two different things. Of course, they're doing everything in their power to create the vision of Euro integration efforts, but the more they try to deny the reality or try to keep quiet, the more people understand that it's just a simulating apparatus. And the prospect of Ukraine membership is met with increasing discontent from the EU member states or the EU candidate states.
Quite reasonable concerns are being voiced about the increase in the tax burden, the redistribution of budget allocations in favor of the new member, the growth of crime and illegal migration, the economic situation within the association, the European Union, which already leaves much to be desired, and it is critical. It will only worsen if Ukraine joins it. In general, it can be stated that this mutual rapprochement with Ukraine, which Brussels is so striving for, has the exact opposite effect. It is not Kiev that is being pulled up to EU standards and norms by leaps and bounds, but rather an increase in economic and political degradation of the European Union to the level of this candidate country and killing the Ukraine by its curators. If it is it, thank you very much. We are moving forward. Anadolu, are you with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have the following question. U.S. President Donald Trump has allowed for a military operation in Nigeria. According to him, the U.S. can send troops into the country or launch airstrikes in response to a record number of killings of Christians in Nigeria by Islamist groups. How does Moscow view such a scenario for the development of the situation in Nigeria? We follow this agenda and we call upon the strict adherence to the norms of international law. If we have any further comments, we will share them. And one more question, if I may. Trump also reported that Kazakhstan officially agreed to join the Abraham Accords. In this way, Kazakhstan will become the first Central Asian state which will join these accords. What does Moscow think of it? I believe that this question should be addressed first and foremost to Kazakhstan, because you cite the third party, not Kazakhstan. So first, you should receive the response from the country that you mentioned, and afterwards, if there is such a need, we will comment on this. Thank you very much. Chinese Media Corporation, are you with us? Good afternoon. We have two questions. Today, in the first part of the briefing, you announced the Expo of food and beverage, which is soon to be open in Shanghai, but the expo is already functioning. The number of exhibitors this year exceeded 4,100 enterprises. At the same time, what signals are being sent, and how do you assess the attractiveness in the current global economic situation? The scale sends different signals to everyone. These signals about the scale is perceived by us as an opportunity, and for someone, this is perceived as a threat. Russia has always underscored the achievements gained by the countries concentrated and focused on their own development and not on interference in someone else's affairs, on tasks and objectives related to improving the quality of life, to overcoming the problems, some domestic internal problems, and we are sincerely happy that they managed to achieve this. And for someone, it is a bone and a threat when they scroll through those news. Perhaps they are envious, perhaps they understand the reality and cannot reconcile themselves to it. For us, it is an opportunity to take part in these events, to gain some benefits from this, and to deepen our diverse cooperation. And for someone, this is only an occasion for new sanctions and threats. If we speak about this 8th China International Import Expo, it is the largest event of this kind in China. Just the other day, it opened. It brought together more than 4,000 enterprises from 135 countries, and it is being organized on a record on the record area. The opening ceremony hosted Li Chang, who noted the dynamism of internal market of China, and he said that this is the bridge between China and the whole world, and we wish we can walk along this bridge. We consider it to be not only an opportunity to come together and communicate, but also an opportunity to further develop an infrastructure. A bridge needs roads which would lead up to it, and roads are always a place for logistics, for trade, and for someone, this bridge is a place where they can lay an explosive. And we are in favor of the first scenario, and we are against the second one. For Russian business, this is another opportunity to share their expertise in trade, investment, and economy, to expand business ties with China, to find reliable partners to enter new markets. Despite turbulence in global economy and trade, Russian-Chinese cooperation has been strengthened. We launch new large-scale projects. Such dimensions as new technologies, industrial cooperation are of increasing popularity. Russian agricultural and IT products are becoming increasingly popular on Chinese markets. No doubt we will use any opportunity, including this expo, in order to promote our dialogue with Chinese partners and from other partners from abroad. Just the other day, the United States announced the deployment of their troops in the Caribbean Sea under the pretext of fighting drug cartels. At the same time, they are modernizing their military bases in the Caribbean region. How could you comment on this? First and foremost, let us begin with the last part of the question, the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine is now cited not only by experts, but by non-experts as well. If we consider what has been going on in this direction, I have commented on this today as well, and we have commented on this on numerous occasions. Of course, we follow the situation, the developments in the southern part of the Caribbean. The situation is aggravating and thus becoming the matter of concern. In 2014, the zone proclaimed itself to be the zone of peace. Russia traditionally stands up in favor of independent and stable development of the Latin America and the Caribbean, the peaceful and civilized solution to all disputes, and we support the Venezuelan authorities in their goals. We are in close contact with our Venezuelan friends. Russia has always demonstrated solidarity with Venezuela. We are ready to respond to the concerns of Caracas. And the most important thing now, I will reiterate, is to refrain from escalation, to foster the constructive solution to all existing problems with respect of all international norms. And one more thing. Perhaps it would be a good thing for the United States, in this turn of their historical development, they remembered that drug is an evil. The United States should remember and should ask itself a question. For the recent decades, who lobbied the spread of drugs and the legalization of drugs? Mentally, philosophically, theoretically, and practically, who made the American society accustomed to the so-called new normalcy, where drugs is a relief, a salvation from all misfortunes, from depression, a source of entertainment and leisure. Perhaps one should look for this very person, for those very criminals inside the American elites. Perhaps they should ask a question: who inside the country, inside the United States, lobbied for the spread of drugs and facilitates the spread of drugs? Who was engaged in those activities on international platforms for many years? Speaking on behalf of the United States, who were in favor of supplement therapy when people who had addiction to drugs were not supposed to be treated, and this policy was falsely criticized, and this addiction was not, and perhaps this should have been the initial point, and they should have paid a good deal of attention to this issue. When Russia, including on international platforms, has brought up these questions for some reason, those were the representatives of the Western communities, the United States, criticized Russia for such an approach. And now they say that those were different authorities, different American representatives, but nevertheless they are U.S. citizens. They hold high-ranking positions. They are on board of directors of large companies. Perhaps we should ask them a question: how did it come that the cities of United States are now a venue for such a big number of drug addicts? They are doing it openly, and they are dying from drugs in the streets. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your question. Ukraina.ru, are you with us? Good afternoon. I have 3 questions. My first question: Slovakia, Hungary, and Czech Republic are going to organize the so-called anti-Ukrainian coalition, allegedly understanding that the Brussels policy towards Moscow is dangerous. Could this coalition create the prerequisites for peace in Ukraine by way of the EU's departure from a harsh war policy? We have already given an answer to a similar question during our last briefing. Then your colleagues asked about Hungary. I will repeat our position. At present, there is no legally formalized union of the mentioned 3 European countries. There is only a coincidence of their interests on certain issues of the international agenda. Rather, it is only about the possible coordination of their efforts. Bratislava, Budapest, and Prague, in upholding their national interests in the face of constant pressure from the European bureaucracy and Washington, and so on. Let me reiterate, we appreciate the pragmatic approach of individual states to building a constructive dialogue with our country, the demonstration of sovereign approaches to principal international issues. It's a heroic deed in the modern world when it comes to domestic agenda and to principled international issues. My second question: how would you comment on the crisis in the British royal family around the situation, the scandal around King Charles' brother Prince Andrew, who was a friend with Epstein and participated in his orgies? This is a manifestation of the general crisis of the elites of the Western countries, which are becoming increasingly inadequate, isn't it? First and foremost, we do not comment on such questions, first and foremost on the basis of principle of non-interference into affairs of other states and following the norms of moral and ethics, and we will make no comments in this regard. But on the other hand, they themselves undermine this very ethics by lecturing us all the time on moral values and ethical values and norms, not merely lecturing us, but imposing their ideas and understanding in this regard. That is why my second point will be the following. I believe that you have already answered your own question when you cited concrete facts, not some vague ideas. And my third point, you mentioned European elites. Why only European elites? It is the case of ruling elites in the West. They are not holding the power, but those who have concentrated every means of financial and political power and rule, the influence on decision-making. No doubt this is the case of a crisis which is happening indeed, and everyone who has the courage to speak about this does this and comments on this. The former foreign minister of Austria wrote a book on the matter, and you can get familiar with this book, and she says not about only the degradation of Europe, but about the Europe is perishing, the Europe is dying, and this all is happening inside these ruling elites. Besides all of this, we see on numerous occasions that people which are not fit for this position are coming to the power. They are demonstrating professional incompetence, a low level of general culture, ideological narrow-mindedness. And responding to the previous question, I have already spoken about this, but they are trying to legalize, to justify, to praise the addictions of the modern generation. This is the progressing degradation of the Western elites, which is expressed in their loss of understanding of the goals of the development of society and the individual traditional values and any social norms. And as a result, we can see such horrific manifestations as the transplantation of sexual organs of children, abandonment of the traditional understanding of family, the replacement, the substitution of it by some simulations, the undermining of very primordial ideas and achievements by their own ideas. They are merely exterminating traditional values. And these are the manifestation of this crisis we are seeing. You have already commented on nuclear tests and statements made by Trump. Perhaps you can add something in this regard. I did not quite understand this question. Please rephrase it. How did Donald Trump's statements regarding nuclear tests influence Russia-US contacts? I have already given an answer to it. And the other day, the Security Council of Russia held a meeting, and the instruction voiced by President can be a response to your question as well. The relevant instructions were received by the Foreign Ministry, and the Foreign Ministry got down to implementing the task which was set by the leadership of Russia.
Is News.are you with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Following the report of the European Commission, how could you comment the exception of the European Commission on the torture in Ukrainian prisons? Why is it flourishing right now? I wouldn't speak about the global change in Europe or European Commission when it comes to Zelensky for one simple reason, that coming to light means that they weren't aware, not that they were. Now they're aware, but I believe that the European Commission was aware. They tried to pretend like they were trying to build a world order in Ukraine with their standards. But in actuality. They were trying to instigate the escalation of this conflict. So it's probably some journalists, politicians, public officials who suddenly were made aware of this, who supposedly believed the narratives that were imposed on them, and now they understand what this has brought upon them. And I believe the people are now understanding of the Western European states when they've started to take note and see what the states have done when they've started raising the tariffs on electricity, and the electricity rates and bills have gone up, and new problems that they're facing. I believe in this case, this word could be used only in this case. As for the European Commission, we can't be sure about anything, and we can't use it with them, because for many years they were very much aware of what is happening in Ukraine, what Zelensky's clique was doing when they tried to eradicate anything that went against their ideology, including torture and prisons, and they still continue to mask and sponsor the Kiev terrorist regime, despite the growing complaints for Ukrainian authorities, including the European Human Rights Court, including illegal arrests. The representatives continue their titanic efforts in order to hide the crimes of the Kiev regime sponsored by Europe. And another European Commission report, when it comes to hypothetical EU membership of Ukraine that you're referring to, is another effort to distort the reality and to paint the picture of tortures in prisons, just a singular nature. And this was the ideals of Europe are presenting some kind of guarantees that are obvious just to them in order to present a positive outlook for the future. Other than that, Commission is being very careful when picking words to describe the human rights situation in Ukraine, including the current lawlessness. They use different phrases in order to take objective look at the situation. You just need a couple examples, and we always show them, but I can share them with you even right now. The European Commission, according to them, in Ukraine, there are rare violations, such as threats, when it comes to religious matters. So, how could they possibly have said that? Do they refuse to see legal persecution of the servants of the Ukrainian church, or seizures of churches, or the discriminatory systems? Any kind of actions. The images are made public, how the church servicemen are behind bars, or they're in courts during the hearings trying to justify something they should never have to answer for. There are images of shellings of churches, how people are not being allowed to enter the church, how they're carrying out holy relics, or they're replacing holy sites, they're replacing the symbols that was present there for decades, for centuries. It's like they refuse to see it. And the real mocking of the human rights are the recommendations of the Kiev regime to implement steps on creating mechanisms of legal denial according to international standards of providing the freedom of conscience and religious beliefs. How could this even be? When you let fox into the Henley, it's like trying to read a tractate on the rights of chickens. Do you understand how ridiculous it is? It's kind of a similar story. Not just that, asking whether the fox has learned the lesson, and without making sure, just opening the gates. But the more the merrier. Rights of ethnical, linguistic, or religious minorities, as it states, were apparently respected. About linguistic minorities, overall the rights were respected. Overall, Zelensky speaks Russian at home, so you could say that the president supports the multi-linguistic situation that is guaranteed by the laws of the country. I believe that is their logic. Should we talk about the fact that the heroization of Nazis, discrimination and repressions of the Russian-speaking population, there are no mention of them. And nor do they notice what is being done by these hunters. Just one case would be enough to be brought to the attention of the Human Rights Court. There are images of screams, asks for help. People are being shackled. People are being tied, just begging for help. They're carrying them by hair, by their hands, by their feet, without any justification whatsoever. And that all despite the fact that they currently changed the laws. All these manipulations of the European law-abiders are another proof of the degradation of the human rights agenda of the European Union. If you have no further questions, thank you. Moving on. Is Bolt News with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Thank you so much for a chance to ask the question. The Baltic states Russian media are systematically blocked and citizens are deprived of the opportunity to study alternative information. Can we say that it is Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia that are flagships among Western countries? How should Russia fight this issue? Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are among the enemy states of Russia who try to follow the course to aggravate the offense against our country. They try to cleanse their space of any Russian information resources. They not only censor our media, but also independent media, tighten repression against free-thinking journalists. Even sympathy for Russia is now a criminal offense. Anti-Russian propaganda is flourishing, and part of which is the so-called cancellation of the Russian language and culture. You see the terms that they're using. And yes, this is a flagrant process of trying to turn these countries into police regimes of the neo-Nazi kind. The proof of that is the total Russophobia. Thank you so much. Thank you. Is Al-Maidin with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. The Lebanese mass media had information that the Russian Foreign Ministry, that Russia allegedly warned Lebanon about possible threats from Israel. How would you assess this information? I cannot assess it because I wasn't made aware of it. I am aware of many speculations, but I don't consider it necessary to comment on that. Russia's maintains contact both with Israeli officials and the Lebanese officials, and during these contacts we discussed the difficult situation on the border between these countries and other issues. And of course we're very concerned that there are more and more reports of the violations of Israel, of the ceasefire agreements that entered into force in November 2024. And we have presented our principal position of avoiding any steps that could lead to the escalation of violence and new resurgence of the conflict. And when contact maintaining contacts with our regional authorities. We will continue contributing efforts towards the long-standing, sustainable stabilization in Israel, Lebanon, and Middle East as a whole. Thank you. Thank you. Is Newsfront with us? Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Just one question. How could you contact on the plans of the German concern Rheinmetall to build a large gunpowder and ammunition plant in Bulgaria? I believe everyone saw how on October 28th in Sofia, in the presence of the top political leadership of Bulgaria, a contract was signed between the state military industrial enterprise Wazovsky Machinery Zavod and the German concern Rheinmetall on the construction of the largest gunpowder and ammunition plant on the Bulgarian territory. This is yet another act on shifting European economies to a war footing. Can you imagine? Earlier, our citizens would align Sopot with culture, with songs, with competitions, right? There was a competition in Sopot, a festival that was held there. Now the city, for our country, will have a different association and far from music. And a characteristic episode was the tour of the President of the European Commission, Madame von der Leyen, to a number of frontline, as they were classified in Brussels, EU states, including Bulgaria, at the end of August, beginning of September this year. At the time, she unequivocally demanded an increase in military spending and an expansion of military technical production. Of course, for a clear goal, the confrontation with Russia, which has long turned into an obsession or a mania for Euro bureaucrats. And it was a convenient way to hide the disastrous results of economic and social policy, the inability to get to grips with solving systematic problems at home. It's just nothing but a veil to draw away the attention of the failing policy of Brussels in the Euro integration track. When the European Union used to be European Economic Council, this organization helped citizens to survive, and right now they're preventing them from leaving. In conditions where many European states remain sovereign only in words, their governments automatically carry out orders from Brussels without thinking about the real needs of their own citizens or the situation at hand. And we see the steps that lead the situation to the brink of failure. And a contract was signed for the construction by the Rheinmetall concern of a gunpowder plant in Romania. We consider the trend towards the militarization of the European Union to be catastrophic, which, taking into account the events in Ukraine, leads to an exorbitant increase in military political risks in Europe. And also, any lack of understanding of history of their own people, of their own history, of their own states, of the 20th century. They fully rewrote history, turned their population into zombies, canceled the culture of reading, understanding of historic documents, have demolished any monuments, have made up documents distorting the historic events. And here's where they get the opportunity to manipulate the people and paint the militarization as strife for peace. Ordinary Bulgarians, despite the policy of the authorities, for the most part soberly assess the situation, are by no means eager for their country to be turned into a frontline state. I'd like to reiterate, this is the term that has been imposed by Brussels.
Patriotic forces in Bulgaria are protesting against placement of new arms systems, and they are emphasizing that this will no longer improve the unfavorable economic situation. However, Bulgarian people have a good historical memory. Western advisors have more than once drawn them into military misadventures that turned into great trouble, as I have already said, and the example of the 20th century, the 30s and the 40s should never be forgotten. And despite the irresponsible behavior of politicians, the Bulgarian people, with their inherent common sense and love of freedom, I believe, and the respect for the true interests of their homeland, and well-being and prosperity of Bulgaria were won and were achieved at a heavy cost. They paid a high price for that, and that is why should they now be succumb to the lies carried out by someone? Rudolph, are you with us?
Maria Zakharova. I have three questions. My first question is, Kurdistan Workers' Party have withdrawn their fighters from Turkey to Kurdistan region in northern of Iraq. How does Russia see this step for forwarding peace process in Turkey? Also, how do you think this step will contribute to peace in Syria?
Россия выступает в поддержку политическую.
Russia supports the political settlement of the existing problems and welcomes the corresponding efforts to the parties. We proceed for the need to ensure peace and stability both in individual countries and in the entire multinational and multi-confessional region.
The question is that, as Russia, have you made any contract with Syria to sell them oil and natural gas? What's the cost agreed on per barrel?
Между нашими странами.
Between our states, if we speak about Russia and Syria, we have official contacts at all levels, and we are satisfied that they have recently acquired an intensive character during the talks held on October 15th of this year in Moscow between the President of the Russian Federation and the President of Syria. A mutual intention was confirmed to restart the entire complex of bilateral ties in the new conditions, including the activation of the work of the Permanent Russian-Syrian Commission on Trade, Economic and Scientific Technical Cooperation. The dialogue between Russia and Syria continues its agenda. And I would like to say the agenda covers a wide range of issues of bilateral cooperation, including in the oil and gas sector. Specific parameters, in particular financial aspects, are discussed through the channels of relevant agencies and experts.
Last question is that we are going to have a parliamentary election in Iraq on November 11th. How do you see Iraq and forming a strong government?
Предстоящий 11 ноября очередной.
The upcoming regular parliamentary elections in Iraq on November 11 are an important stage in the political life of this country, and this is exactly how the Iraqis themselves assess them. The interested political structures interested in the implementation of rights and freedoms of their peoples, of strengthening the statehood of their own state, and this is how they are assessed by the interested political structures, which are now actively participating in the election campaign. We wish our Iraqi friends a successful organization of the elections and the implementation of the expression of the will of their peoples and the formation of a new government based on its results.
Zakharova, hopefully you will always be safe, healthy and strong. Thanks.
Спасибо вам большое. Взаимно.
Thank you very much. Same to you. After are you with us? Good afternoon. I'm Ruslan Pankratov. We have two questions. Russia is actively winning sympathies in the countries of Africa, the Middle East and Latin America. However, Russia's contribution to development aid is only 1.2 million euros per year compared to 95 billion euros from the European Union. And what is the long-term attractiveness of the Russian model for the global South-based? Why do they love us so much? not for the money. You have already answered to the question, not for the money. I would like to separate those two questions. There exists love. Love can be demonstrated in different ways. But we know that what love for convenience, love for money is called. So let us not put these two things together, love and money. Let us separate those two. We are not going to hurt the feelings based on a quite complicated history. I mean, the countries of the global majority, the global south. Different political terms are used here. I do ask you, please, when it comes to these sensitive matters, do separate them. There certainly will be someone who will be happy to have upon the word game. Those, in order to organize a provocation, will wind up the spiral, and those will not serve your interests. That is why I ask you to understand perfectly that you live in the world full of provocations. So when someone is willing to have fun, to say a joke, to do it very sensibly and reasonably, and to not give any reasons and any pretext for a provocation. Economic indicators are one thing, and you are right when saying when these states, these countries of global south and global majority are tied to Russia with particular relations, history, love, mutual understanding, and all these things are inseparable from one another. Without knowing history, no one can truly understand each other. No one can reach the understanding which would be profound and genuine. Without understanding, no one can never speak of true and deep love. Let us remember that the countries that you mentioned, they are our natural allies when it comes to defending our social, cultural, civilization aspects. We are not united at this particular stage of history, but we are united because we have been fighting for these very values for a long time. We have tried different things, and we were proposed to try different things, and that is why we realize that there are true values and there are quasi-values. Those countries are committed to democratizing international life. They seek cultural and civilizational development. We are united by the thing that we do not accept dictatorship, enslavement, the rejection of modern practices of neocolonialism, be that done directly when people are sold on slave markets, or be that new technological reality or new technological case when it comes to enslavement of people via new technologies and attempts to impose the so-called technological progress, and under this pretext, individuals are being tied by obligations and being put into direct dependency without equal access to new technologies and with no regard to the particular aspects of our historical development. We are united by the fact that we do not accept this. This is all based on our historical past and our mutual support. We do see huge potential for expanding interaction with the states of the global south, in particular with those who, like us, are subjected to systematic pressure from states with unfriendly governments. So for us, when it comes to practical cooperation, It is trade, finance, high technologies, security. You were right in saying when someone is proposing something bigger, but for us, equality is important. Take a look at investment, take a look at the aid which is being offered by the West, and quite often it comes back through this diverse structure and system of funds and companies. They allocate funds, but eventually these are Western companies and enterprises who benefit from that. And this enriches the Western countries and not the peoples living and residing on particular territories of the region you have mentioned. Also, I would like to remind you that behind political term global majority and the global south, this is not mere a wording, this is not a monolithic community which is constituent of some particular titles and names. Those states are not homogeneous in political, economic, social, cultural, and civilizational aspects. This is a life fabric of contacts, developments, and to my mind, to conclude, our country is linked with most of those states by the desire to make independent domestic and foreign policy decisions, as well as support for the formation of a multipolar world order. The logic of exceptionalism, of selectiveness, is alien to us. Not in the form of ideals everyone should seek, but in the form of central philosophy for some particular states. We do not merely understand this. No, we do understand this, but this is foreign to us. We alienate ourselves from this logic. But we should not be separated from the global majority. We are a part of it. Thank you very much. My second question. Trump's statement in January 2025 about his intention to seize Greenland has returned the Arctic to the center of rivalry. How can the risks of militarization of the Arctic be assessed? Is the region turning into a new theater of the Cold War? I would not comment on those statements at this point. Those statements were made by Trump, indeed, but they were made almost 1 year ago. I would focus instead not on the public part of the discussion, but on the realities, and would analyze the NATO activities in the region. The strategic importance of the Arctic literally continues to grow steadily. At the representation of Western countries, the region, once distinguished by a special spirit of peaceful, constructive cooperation, is seen a rise in military political tension, and dangerous prerequisites are being formed for the intensification of rivalry. Even there, just look, under the pretext of countering mythical threats from the East. And now we are speaking about the Arctic. The US and NATO continue to follow a course of active militarization of the Arctic, strengthening their offensive potential. The European Union is adopting ever new packages of illegitimate anti-Russian sanctions, creating additional obstacles to the development of the Russian Arctic and international cooperation in the North as a whole. The entry of Finland and Sweden into the North Atlantic Alliance has resulted into an additional escalation of the situation. NATO is actively using the territory of the Arctic member states to increase the number of coalition forces and the intensity of combat training activities, adapting civilian transport infrastructure for military use. I would like to emphasize this: for military use, deploying additional intelligence assets, allocating over $300 billion for the needs until 2034. This year alone, including in the immediate vicinity of Russia's borders. About 10 large-scale NATO maneuvers have been conducted in the region, including the annual nuclear deterrence exercises Spokesperson Noon 25 held this past October. This is not the matter of separate individual statements based on emotions or a political position. This should be analyzed as a whole. What infrastructure, what philosophy has been underpinning this very logic? The value of the Arctic for the Russian Federation can hardly be overestimated. Our country has never threatened anyone in the Arctic. It remains committed to international law, to the search for political diplomatic solutions for all emerging issues, including in the high latitudes. That is why we will continue to build an adequate line of response to threats and challenges to our security. At the same time, we consider this territory to be the territory of peaceful exploration and cooperation. Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions? If no more questions, then see you next time. Thank you very much. All the best to you.
Получше.